When the news about DC launching a new imprint, DC Horror, first hit the streets, the response from fans was that of uncertainty and doubts. Considering that it's very DC to start an imprint only to give it an untimely demise, it was a fitting response. Also, many asked the tough questions about why not instead relaunch the Vertigo imprint, which is still remembered for the horrors raised, or continue with the Black label, which later accommodated most of the Vertigo label comics. By the way, not forgetting Joe Hill's bone-chilling Hill House Comics imprint. However, with the release of DC Horror's first comic, and as soon as people became aware of the idea behind the imprint, which comprises limited comic series along with the one-shots, popularity and acceptance of the label have steadily risen. Nonetheless, curiosity peaked only with the release of the latest comic book series. This series is a collection of anthologies, and is set in the midst of action in our very own DC universe, starting off with the release of DC Horror Presents #1. Before we go into our explanation, we have a very small request. If you like our content, please support us by subscribing to our channel. This is a small click for you, but for us it means a lot. Thank you. Let's begin. Is DC finally announcing its commitment to the horror genre? DC's premises and settings have long been considered picture-perfect for raising scares. Well, most of us are acquainted with Gotham. We've seen the dingy, dark alleys ripe for jump scares. But when we realize that Gotham is not the worst or the darkest setting in DC, one understands the potential the streets, skies, and even buildings offer for horror, coupled with the ever-developing list of antagonists who, unlike Marvel, are portrayed in all their brutality. Take, for example, how many equivalents of Arkham Asylum can be found in the Marvel Cinematic Universe. And we know that many of the human villains, at least, occupy the cells of the asylum. Psychopaths, sociopaths, serial killers, blood, gore, sadism, you name it. Every horror-come-slasher-come-exploitation trope can be found in this universe. Not to mention those who cannot be restricted by the walls of the asylums and prisons. So it was high time that DC explored the genre's potential to its fullest extent, and not with a once-in-a-while series. With the announcement that DC is going to dedicate an entire label with Katie Kubert at the helm, we can see a step taken in the right direction. Now the real question is, how long will the imprint sustain? With the reception of The Conjuring, The Lover, Soul Plumber, Sergeant Rock vs. the Army of the Dead, and Creature Commandos received, surely DC has tasted blood. And now, with the release of #1, DC has opened a whole new dimension. Why? Let's check it out. What's in store for us? Let's start with the tagline that the comic book came with, which gives us a few takeaways. Bone crunching, worms munching, blood splattering, these are a few of our favorite things. From some of the most dark and cunning minds in horror comes DC Presents, a new collection of gruesome tales set in the DCU. With stories penned by some of our favorite names in horror, this anthology will have die-hard horror fans quaking with fear, reads the advertising. The tone indicates a slasher fest with gory detailing, doesn't it? The first thing that comes to our mind is the explicit capturing of the visceral, bloody action. Still, is it necessary to always bring the intestines and distorted bodies to raise the level of gore? Let's see. The cover is bone-chilling with the detailing of Superman's terror-stricken face gagged by threads, drawing lines of blood and wrinkling his face painfully. But that level of gruesomeness, in terms of visuality, is not what we get in the panels, yet being enough to strike and kindle our imagination. Rather than depending on an explicit visualization, it is the short, sharp storylines in the two anthologies of the first issue which raise horror and tension in the readers. Personally, what is more of interest to me is the fact that the stories are set in DCU, about which the tagline itself gave a clear indication. This interests me because it established that the stories in the underbellies of what we have seen till now is ripe with more darkness and more horror. Even though there have been standalones released by DC, which give people nightmares, the fact that they were standalones takes away a vital part in terms of what we know. It's the complexity of the DCU, with all its intertwined storylines, myths, and lore, which gives us an element of curiosity, leading us to newer levels of imagination. How terrifying are the two anthologies? #1 brilliantly places the first two stories in the anthology. We see a bit lesser-known Dollhouse, Dollmaker, and the Toy Box coming into play in the first story, and in the second, the popular premise of Wonder Woman and Themyscira. Also, some of you acquainted with the Dollmakers would know about the horror elements the stories carry. Still, by placing it along with Wonder Woman, which is not known for the horror elements, the makers surely make it clear that the stories are going to be a mixture of conventional and unconventional. A deadly dollhouse and a woeful Wonder Woman. The first anthology, titled Love You to Pieces, introduces us to a shocked Dollhouse, who, on her arrival at home, finds her love, Max, dead. Dollhouse, though, has other ideas, as she asks the paramedics to leave him alone, as she could fix him. For those who have not yet explored Dollhouse or Matilda Mathis, she's the daughter of dollmaker, Barton Mathis. Both of them are known for their sick, twisted ideals, which are used to justify slaughtering people and harvesting their organs. Back to the comic, we're introduced to another side or shade of Matilda, as she's shown helpless, screaming and shouting, seeing her love of life dead. But before we almost get sympathetic to her, a sudden slash of her trademark sledgehammer brutality kills one of the paramedics. With no other option left, the other poor guy drives to the toy box under her threats. The toy box is the real house of horrors, and the doll maker's house. Before the frightened paramedic could say anything, we see his head smashed to pieces by Dollhouse. Here we see her father, the doll maker, donning his characteristic skin-made mask. We now get to know that what Dollhouse meant when she said she could fix Max, as we see Max's body being taken to the surgical room by Barton's faceless human toy hybrid slaves. By now, Dollhouse too wears her skin-made mask. We're given a hint regarding why Max committed suicide, as we see Matilda asking her father not to bring him to life at the surgery room, as he's sensitive. Instead, he's taken to another room, where he's brought back to life by Matilda by charging his body using electricity. It's in the climax that we get the real surprise and terror, when we realize that it was Max himself who committed suicide, as he preferred death over a relationship and life with the twisted Dollhouse. A life which is painfully ended again by smashing his head into pieces by Matilda, as three tied and gagged men in the background watch with a sense of helplessness and horror. The second anthology starts here, and we're taken to Themyscira. We see a group of Amazonians led by Diana, looking at a brutally disfigured body, with hands tied to a statue, intestines lying around, and legs butchered. Soon we're made aware that it is the third day into the killing spree, and someone is on the loose. As the Amazons start thinking about the possibility of an intruder on the island, because it could never be one of their sisters, a soldier comes running, screaming with fear and tension that the scouts have traced the blood trail. The trail is followed by the Amazons to reach Hippolyta's grave. Here we see the guarded grave being tampered with. The tension rises as Diana feels something moving inside the grave, and before we can think much, a zombified Hippolyta rises from the grave, punching and throwing aside a shocked Diana. Hippolyta overpowers the other Amazons before Donna ties her. However, suddenly, Diana sees Donna and the subdued zombie Hippolyta transformed into an apparition of Heracles subduing Hippolyta, prompting Diana to shoot an arrow through the shoulder of Donna. Hippolyta, who now gets released from Donna's hands, plunges onto Diana and chokes her. The rotten and decomposed body of Hippolyta is graphically captured by the illustrations, with worms and flies crawling out of her mouth. Diana is taken to Doom's doorway, and here we get to know the real intention of Hippolyta, who wants to return to life on Earth by replacing Diana. We understand that something sinister is at play, as Hippolyta's soul has been defiled. But before Diana is pushed through Doom's doorway, Donna comes to her rescue and manages to shut the door with Diana. However, it was not relief, but actually guilt that Diana experiences, as we see the frame shift to Diana and Donna being seen through a crystal ball by an unnamed member of the Circle, sitting over a pile of bodies of dead men. The people behind the scenes, the writers and the artists. It won't be difficult to remember Joker's psycho henchman, Thomas Schiff, in the classic The Dark Knight. Well, David Dastmalchian, who has played many more famous roles along with Schiff's, sparks off the anthology along with Leah Kilpatrick. The duo teamed up previously for the Dark Horse Halloween anthology, Headless Horseman Halloween Annual, which was much acclaimed, and they've certainly raised the bar with #1 of DC Horror Presents. Cat Staggs, who's already proven himself with illustrations for DC, does the pencils and inks for most of the story, with Romulo Fajardo Jr. bringing the dark world of the dollhouse to life through his shades. DC brought in Fangoria's Horror New Icons of 2022, and the hosts of the special issue of the Heavy Metal, Boulet Brothers, to write the second story script. By bringing in heavyweights amongst horror fans, DC has clearly indicated their commitment and seriousness toward the genre. Added with Butch Mappa's drawings and Christian Rossi's colors, Wonder Woman's entry into horror becomes smooth and terrifying at the same time. Future of DC Horror Presents. With #1 proving up to the mark, the fans have been restless for #2. Also, considering that we have NAACP award-winning LaToya Morgan providing the story for the second issue, the hype is high. Morgan is also known for providing scripts to The Walking Dead, which is currently running on a high reception. Adding to this the fact that she'll be writing along with the famous TV presenter and self-proclaimed paranormal journalist Aaron Sagers. Wow, indeed. An interesting combination of the formal and informal. But sadly, the only thing we can do currently is wait until November 27th when it goes on sale. Buckle yourselves up, as the last one in the series will be starring Adam Strange, written by the well-established horror comic writers Francesco Francavilla and Patrick Horvath. #3 will be released on Christmas Day. Marvelous conclusion. The old debates and discussions regarding the revival of Vertigo or accommodating the horror under Black Label had taken a backstage with DC Horror's hits. However, with the announcement of Vertigo making a comeback, starting with retro positioning of Nice House on the Lake, the debates have started again. It's still to be seen whether, by the time Vertigo starts publishing, DC Horror will be able to make a dedicated fanbase of its own. If you liked our content, don't forget to leave a like and subscribe to us if you haven't already. Have a good one and be safe. Thanks, everyone.